How do I know what to pick? How do I know what type of trim and doors to put in my space? I could talk for hours about trims and moldings and cabinetry and doors. Trim carpentry is a passion of mine, but I don't want to overwhelm you or bore you. So this video, I just want to give you some guidelines, some basic principles, give you some background into a few different types of moldings, talk a little bit about doors, and arm you with just a little bit more information. So let's get to it. Before I go further, one thing I will mention, if you're remodeling one space, a bathroom, a bedroom, you're going to want to take into consideration the whole house. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I walk into a house and it's got mismatched trim all throughout. So you're gonna want one door style through the whole house, one baseboard style through the whole house, one door casing and window style through the whole house. If you have a cohesive look, it's going to feel intentional, it's going to feel more put together, and it's going to be a better result. So if you're remodeling one room, maybe take into consideration, you may want to just match what's existing in the rest of the house. Or what I tell people often is if your home is outdated and you plan to eventually change all the doors and trim, maybe now's the time when we put that new bathroom in to update the trim and doors in that space for what you plan to redo in the rest of the house. So your two primary types of molding are going to be your window and door casing and your baseboard. So your window and door casing is the molding that's going to go around the frame of your doors, around the frame of your windows, depending on the window style, and your baseboard goes around the perimeter of your rooms, up against the floor. Here are potentially the two most common styles. This is a colonial door casing. This is a standard colonial baseboard. Something to keep in mind is the size of your molding and the size of the space. Larger moldings in a space can make the space feel smaller. It can also give it a more ornate or cozy feel. And if you have a large space and you put thin moldings, unless you're doing it intentionally, it can look washed out or insufficient. So that's something to play with. Moldings can really accent a space. This is an opportunity to get unique. On that note, another big annoyance of mine is when you go into a brand new home that had the opportunity to do something unique and just went with the most boring stock moldings that they sell. I always feel like that's a big miss. If you've got a thinner door casing, you're not gonna wanna pair it with a big tall baseboard. That's gonna look off balanced. If you want a big tall baseboard, especially if you have something like 9-foot ceilings, you're not gonna want something like this at the bottom. That again is going to look puny in comparison to the space. So if that were to be the case, you would want to go with a wider molding for your door casing so that it's balanced out by your baseboard. Door casings and window casings and baseboards and moldings, all the moldings out there have a specific use. Another huge pet peeve of mine is when people misuse trim. I've gone into houses and I've seen moldings like this flipped on end and used as baseboard. It's wrong, it's terrible, it's not what it's used for. It also creates issues because moldings are designed a certain way. Your door casing is supposed to always be thicker than your baseboard so that you don't have weird corners coming together where your baseboard dies into your door casing. So size of the moldings and their use is something that is important. You've got stuff, from this simple profile, you've got wider with a lot more detail. There's all sorts of things to consider. The best thing you can do when picking moldings is to have an end goal in mind with the style of the space. If modern or farmhouse or mid-century is your vibe, match the moldings to that. If it's more modern or mid-century, you're probably gonna want something more simple. If you like the old colonial historic look, maybe something more complex that has more shadow lines in it, that fits that style of home. The next important thing when it comes to moldings is material. There are a handful of different types of materials out there which greatly affect how they function, how they last, and their cost. So you can have something as simple as what you're gonna find. This is something you find at most of your big box stores. It's pre-primed. It's what they call finger jointed, where they take small pieces of wood and then they mill them and glue them and joint small pieces together to make it one solid piece. The pro on this style is that sometimes it's more stable than a solid piece of wood, but when done cheaply with cheap materials, it's not a great choice. Comparatively, you may have a higher quality molding like this one is also finger jointed, but they've used a higher quality poplar instead of, you know, cheap pine, which makes this more desirable. So these two moldings are the same style, but this one is a primed finger jointed board and this one is a solid poplar board. So this one is, you can see it even has a bit more curve to it because it's a natural piece, but this is potentially going to have a smoother finish in the end versus something like this that, you know, has some blemishes and defects in it from where all those pieces come together. This is going to be more expensive, so oftentimes people opt for this as a cost-effective solution. They also make MDF trim, which is a medium density fiber board. In my opinion, it's glorified cardboard that they wrap with a veneer or they paint. It is another huge pet peeve of mine. I hate seeing this stuff at all. I've lived in houses that have had this, and I've been in loads of our projects that we've remodeled that have had this, and almost consistently you can see where your vacuum cleaner has run into it, where it's been bumped into carrying furniture. It dents, it dings, chunks blow out of it, and it's almost impossible to repair. If you get a gouge or a hole in a wood product, it is, if you know what you're doing, it's quite simple to make a patch or repair. Making a patch or a repair on this stuff is next to impossible. But it's the cheapest, so it is common to see. So when picking out your trim, the other thing that you're gonna pick out, especially in a new home, is going to be doors. So we'll go over there and we'll talk a little bit about doors. Two things to consider when you're choosing doors are going to be style and material. There's loads of different door styles. This one is a single panel craftsman style door. This one is a raised panel, 2-panel arch top, different look, different feel. You've got something real simple and basic like this flush panel door. Those were popular 80s, early 90s. They're cheap. So again, pick a style that's going to match with your trim, that's going to match with the rest of your house. You can get creative with it. The other thing would be door construction and door material. These are both pre-primed masonite doors. They're made with a pressed board material. There's very little real wood in these. If you're painting them, if you're trying to stick to something a little bit more budget friendly, these are a great choice. They also have, you can also get solid wood doors. I didn't have one in the shop to show you, but all of this is made from wood so that it can be stained. We've done oak doors, birch, poplar. If you know whether you're staining or painting your woodwork in your doors, that's going to go a long way in helping you decide what material you're going to want to use. Another major consideration is there's two types of doors that you'll hear about. You'll hear about hollow core doors and solid core doors. Hollow core doors are a huge pet peeve of mine. I think there is no reason to ever put a hollow core door in your house. They're cheaper, that is it. So a hollow core door literally means that the inside of this door is hollow, versus a solid core door will have solid material, not always wood. So a good example, here we have a hollow core flush panel door. On the inside, this is actually how this door is constructed. The entire core is hollow. They've actually used, this is legitimately just cardboard and a very rudimentary honeycomb pattern to give it some stability. And then we've got a thin strip of finger jointed pine around the edges so that it'll take hinges. And then where your knob set goes, they've got one piece of rough pressed board to give your door some stability around the doorknob. The difference if this was solid core is at least the entire core would be made out of this pressed board material, which means it's not going to, you can feel that this is bending and giving. This gets hit and you're gonna put holes in it. It's not very durable. It has very little sound resistance from room to room, and they just feel flimsy and cheap when you're opening and closing doors. So at the very least, I highly recommend always spending a little extra money, not even that much, and going with a solid core option. Another note of mention is door hardware. You're really gonna want your hinges and your hardware to match. When you order pre-hung doors that come with the door and the frame, when you order them, you have to specify hinge color. So to know that in advance is great. There's a few different types of hinges. Most of the time they're simple. There's some really high-end ones. For most intents and purposes, a simple squeak-free hinge is going to be a good option. Handles, we've got knob style and we've got lever style. Those are your two main categories for knobs. Lever style tend to be slightly more expensive. I like them because the accessibility of them is great. People with any sort of accessibility restrictions can access them well. It is actually required for certain ADA requirements require lever style handles instead of knobs. I have lever handles on all of my exterior doors, which is really great because you can open them with an elbow. I've opened them with a foot before. Lever handles can be great for that. You're gonna want all of your door hardware throughout your house to match. That is going to be your best look. Within the two main setups, a lever style or a knob style, there's loads of designs to choose from, loads of color finishes. You've got your nickels and chromes and blacks and bronzes and golds. All of those things can be matched. If you're designing a new home, if you're remodeling a whole space and you're going to be changing out moldings, making decisions on new doors, hopefully this was informative and gave you a few more pieces of information you didn't have and can help you know what to pick.